The Maine winter had always been a cruel beast, but that January of 2002 felt particularly merciless. In Oakwood Grove, a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, Sarah Collins watched through the window as a fresh blanket of snow smothered the landscape. At 42, faint lines had begun to etch themselves around her eyes, a testament to a life that had been anything but easy. "Jason!" she called for the third time, her knuckles white as she gripped the window frame. "Dinner's ready." Silence was her only answer. Sarah sighed, a plume of mist fogging the cold glass. Raising a teenager alone had never been part of the plan, but when Greg had walked out on them 5 years ago, she'd had no choice but to carry on. Jason, fresh off his 17th birthday, had grown more and more distant over the past few months. The kitchen clock read 8:30 p.m. when the front door finally creaked open. Jason stomped in, shaking snow from his dark coat, his pale face a stark contrast to his jet-black hair. "You're late," Sarah said, placing a plate of stew on the table. "School ended hours ago." "I was with Mike," he answered curtly, avoiding her gaze. "We have a science project." Sarah knew it was a lie. Mike Peterson had called 3 hours earlier looking for Jason for that very project. There was something in her son's eyes that deeply unsettled her. "Jason, we need to talk about your grades. Mr. Donovan called today." The fork Jason was holding clattered against the plate. "Why the hell does he keep calling you? I'm not a kid. You're failing chemistry, and if you don't—" "I don't need chemistry," he interrupted, rising abruptly from his chair. "Not all of us want to spend our lives in some forgotten town working at a diner." The words struck Sarah like a physical blow. She had sacrificed so much for him, working double shifts at Diane's diner just to pay the bills after Greg left. "You have no right to speak to me like that," she replied, her voice dangerously steady. "Tomorrow you and I are going to see Mr. Donovan together." Jason's laugh was cold, a sound Sarah barely recognized. "I'm not going anywhere with you." Before she could respond, the phone rang. Sarah reached for it, grateful for the interruption. "Sarah, it's Ellen." Her neighbor's voice crackled on the line. "Sorry to bother you, but could you look at my furnace tomorrow before work? It's been acting up, and with this storm—" "Of course, Ellen. I'll stop by early." When she hung up, Jason was gone. The thumping bass of music vibrated from his bedroom. Sarah sat alone at the table, staring at the stew that had already gone cold. Tears threatened to spill, but she held them back. She couldn't afford to break. Later that night, as the storm raged outside, Sarah found Jason's journal. She had never invaded his privacy before, but his erratic behavior and the calls from school had pushed her to a desperate place. What she found within its pages made her blood run cold. Disturbing drawings, notes on how to acquire certain chemicals, and what looked like detailed plans for something she couldn't fully comprehend. Dawn found her still awake, debating what to do. Confront him? Seek professional help? Or just wait and pray this was a phase that would pass? January 23rd dawned exceptionally cold. Sarah prepared to go to Ellen's house before her shift at the diner. Jason had already left, his bedroom door locked as usual. On the kitchen counter she found a note. "Be late. Don't wait up for dinner." Sarah never made it to Ellen's house that morning, nor did she show up for her shift at Diane's. Her car remained parked in the driveway, her keys on the hall table. Her favorite coat, the one Greg had given her on their last anniversary together, still hung on the rack by the door. It was Diane who raised the first alarm 3 days later, when Sarah missed a second consecutive day without calling. Something utterly out of character. "I've called several times," Diane explained to Officer Peters as they stood on Sarah's porch. "No one answers." The officer rang the bell again before Jason opened the door. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed with a lack of sleep. Jason, I'm Officer Peters. We're looking for your mother. She went to visit a friend, he replied, his voice steady. In Portland, she's sick. When will she be back? Diane asked, her eyes scanning the unusual mess she could see inside the house. Sarah was meticulous about her home. I don't know. She said it might be a week, maybe more. Officer Peters nodded slowly. Did she leave a number where we can reach her? It's odd she didn't call into work. No, she just said she'd call. Jason shrugged. She's been distracted lately, probably forgot. Something about the ease with which Jason lied sent a chill down Diane's spine. She'd known this boy since he was a baby, and now he felt like a complete stranger. In the following weeks, Jason's story began to unravel. No one had ever heard of this supposed sick friend. Sarah hadn't packed any clothes. Her cell phone was still in the house. Most damning of all, her ID and wallet were found untouched in her purse, tucked away in her bedroom closet. A month after her disappearance, Sheriff Campbell launched a formal investigation. The Collins house became a crime scene, but a search for evidence yielded nothing conclusive. Through it all, Jason maintained his story, unperturbed by the growing scrutiny. As Oakwood Grove began to divide between those who suspected Jason and those who believed in his innocence, no one noticed the small security camera on Ellen Richards' house, its lens aimed partially toward the Collins backyard, a camera that, in silent witness, held the secret of what had truly happened on that cold January night. Spring arrived in Oakwood Grove, melting the snow and revealing a landscape awakening from a long slumber. 3 months had passed since Sarah Collins vanished, and the investigation had stalled. Detective Robert Dawson was assigned to the case in March, a quiet admission by local authorities that they needed specialized help. At 50, with 20 years of experience in missing persons cases, Dawson had a reputation for being meticulous to the point of obsession. I need to review all the evidence again, he demanded in his first meeting with Sheriff Campbell. Every statement, every photograph, every phone log. Campbell sighed, sliding a worn file across the desk. There isn't much. The woman just evaporated. Dawson studied the crime scene photos of the house. Everything looked normal, except for the absence of Sarah. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no obvious clues. What about the son? He asked, his eyes lingering on a photo of Jason taken during his interview. Sticks to his story, says his mother left willingly to see a sick friend. But we have no record of this friend. No calls, no notes. That afternoon, Dawson visited the diner where Sarah had worked for the last 8 years. Diane Marshall, the owner, greeted him with a mixture of hope and resignation. Sarah would never have abandoned Jason, she stated with conviction, pouring the detective a cup of coffee. She was a devoted mother. She worked double shifts to give him everything she could. What was their relationship like? Diane paused, choosing her words carefully. Complicated. Sarah tried so hard, but Jason... He changed after his father left. Became withdrawn, sometimes hostile. Hostile toward his mother? I don't know, Diane admitted. Sarah mentioned arguments, but what teenager doesn't argue with their parents? She was worried about him lately, though, said his behavior was getting more erratic. Dawson's next stop was Oakwood High. Mr. Donovan, Jason's chemistry teacher, seemed nervous discussing the boy. Jason is brilliant but troubled, he explained. His grades dropped drastically in the last few months, and there was an incident. What incident? Dawson pressed. Some chemicals went missing from the lab. I can't prove it was him, but it coincided with his growing interest in unauthorized experiments. That night, Dawson returned to his motel room with more questions than answers. As he reviewed his notes, a pattern began to emerge. Everyone described Jason as a boy who had changed, who had become more secretive, more unpredictable. The next day, Dawson obtained a warrant to search the Collins house again. Jason, now living alone under the occasional supervision of social services, was irritated but cooperative. "You already searched the house," he protested as Dawson meticulously examined each room. "You didn't find anything because there's nothing to find." Dawson watched the young man carefully. For a 17-year-old whose mother had vanished, Jason displayed an unnerving composure. "Jason, why do you think your mother hasn't made contact in 3 months?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. For a fleeting instant, something flickered in his eyes. Fear? Guilt? "I don't know," he finally answered. "Maybe she wanted to start over." With no money, no ID, and without contacting her only son, Dawson listed. "Does that sound plausible to you?" Jason shrugged. "My father did." The search revealed nothing new save for one detail that caught Dawson's attention. The backyard garden showed signs of being recently tilled. "Been doing some gardening?" he asked casually. "Planting some things," Jason replied, his gaze shifting away. "Mom always wanted a vegetable patch." Meanwhile, in another part of town, Ellen Richards decided to upgrade her home security. The camera installed years ago, the one that partially overlooked the Collins yard, had stopped working months back. "I never checked the old recordings," she remarked to the technician installing the new system. "I'm not very good with technology." "We could transfer the files to the new system," the technician offered. "Sometimes you find interesting things on these old tapes." Ellen agreed without giving it much thought, never imagining that on those forgotten recordings lay the answer to the mystery that had consumed Oakwood Grove for months. As Sarah Collins's case seemed to cool, life in town tried to return to normal. Jason finished the school year with mediocre grades, just enough to graduate. Few noticed his growing isolation, the hours he spent locked in the basement, or his frequent late-night visits to the backyard garden. Detective Dawson, however, was not ready to give up. Something about this case, the look in Jason's eyes, the inconsistencies in his story, kept the detective awake at night. In June, nearly 5 months after the disappearance, Dawson had a revealing conversation with Mike Peterson, the friend Jason claimed to have been with the night before Sarah vanished. "I wasn't with him that day," Mike confessed nervously. "He asked me to lie if anyone asked. Said his mom was mad and he needed an alibi for being late." "Did he tell you where he really was?" "No, but—" Mike hesitated. "A couple of weeks before, he showed me something in his backpack. Vials of chemicals he took from the lab. He said he was experimenting with something that could solve his problems." This new information reignited the investigation. Dawson secured a warrant to specifically search the Collins basement, an area that had been only superficially checked in previous searches. What they found was disturbing. A makeshift work area with evidence of chemical experiments, pages torn from books on the effects of certain compounds on the human body, and most chillingly, a notebook filled with detailed calculations on dosages and effects. Still, without a body or direct evidence, it wasn't enough to formally charge Jason. The summer wore on. Jason surprisingly chose not to go to college, opting to stay in Oakwood Grove and work at the local gas station. By the fall of 2003, the disappearance of Sarah Collins had officially become a cold case. Dawson, reassigned to other duties, still visited Oakwood Grove occasionally, watching Jason from a distance, waiting for him to make a mistake. No one could have guessed that the truth was about to be revealed, stored on an old, forgotten recording in Ellen Richards' security system. January 2004 marked the second anniversary of Sarah Collins's disappearance. The case, practically archived, was now little more than a ghost story in Oakwood Grove. Life had moved on for everyone, except for Diane Marshall, who every January 23rd placed a lit candle in the window of her diner in memory of her friend. Jason Collins, now 19, had become a solitary figure in town. He still lived in the family home, worked long shifts at the gas station, and avoided social contact. His once youthful face now held a premature hardness, his eyes carrying an invisible weight. Detective Robert Dawson had been transferred to Portland, but the Collins case remained a thorn in his professional conscience. He periodically reviewed his notes, searching for some detail he had overlooked, some connection he had failed to make. One cold February morning, he received an unexpected call from Sheriff Campbell. "I think you should come to Oakwood," Campbell said, his tone one Dawson had never heard before. "We've got something." 3 hours later, Dawson was sitting in the sheriff's office, watching a grainy recording on a monitor. The date stamp in the corner read January 23rd, 2002, 3:14 a.m. "Where did this come from?" he asked, leaning toward the screen. Ellen Richards was upgrading her security system. The tech transferred the old files and she decided to look through them out of curiosity, Campbell explained. This camera was aimed partially at the Collins' backyard. The footage, though low quality and shot from an oblique angle, clearly showed a figure dragging something heavy across the Collins' snowy yard. The darkness and falling snow obscured details, but the person was unmistakably Jason, pulling what appeared to be a large black sack. "Keep watching," Campbell instructed. The recording continued. Jason dropped the sack, disappeared from view for a moment, and returned with a shovel. For the next 40 minutes, the camera captured him digging a deep hole, placing the sack inside, and meticulously covering it with earth. Afterward, he scattered fresh snow over the area to conceal his work. "My God," Dawson murmured. "We always knew he was involved, but to see it—" "There's more," Campbell added, fast-forwarding the recording to 6:30 a.m. "Look." Jason reappeared in the garden, now dressed in clean clothes. He was carrying something in his hands, which he carefully placed on the very spot where he had buried the sack. As the camera zoomed in, the image sharpened into focus. They were plants, small shrubs he was setting into the freshly turned earth. "The garden," Dawson recalled. "He told me he'd planted a garden because his mother had always loved it." With this new evidence, Dawson and Campbell immediately obtained a warrant to search and excavate the backyard of the Collins house. The judge, visibly shaken by the footage, authorized the operation for that very afternoon. Jason was at his job at the gas station when officers cordoned off his home. Curious neighbors began to gather, watching as the forensic team set up lights and equipment in the backyard. Diane arrived just as the technicians began to dig. "Is it true?" she asked Dawson, her voice cracking. "Do you really think Sarah is—" Dawson couldn't answer. At that moment, one of the forensic technicians raised a hand, halting the excavation. 2 feet down, directly beneath where the new shrubs had been, they found black plastic. Working with extreme care, the forensics team cleared the surrounding earth, revealing a large bundle wrapped in what appeared to be multiple layers of trash bags, reinforced with duct tape. The sun was beginning to set when they finally extracted the entire package. The county medical examiner, Dr. Patrice Montgomery, personally supervised the initial opening on site. "Prepare yourselves," she warned as she carefully cut through the outer plastic. The first thing to hit them was the smell, though less intense than expected due to the cold ground and the many layers of plastic. Inside, they found the partially decomposed remains of a woman. Preliminary identification based on the clothing and a few personal effects found with the body confirmed what they all feared. It was Sarah Collins. "We'll need a full autopsy to determine the exact cause of death," Dr. Montgomery explained. "But I can see some initial anomalies. What kind of anomalies? Dawson asked. No obvious signs of physical trauma, she replied, pointing to specific areas. No weapon wounds, no broken bones that I can see. But there is an unusual discoloration in the visible tissues. It could indicate poisoning, though we'll need toxicology to confirm. The news of the discovery spread through Oakwood Grove like wildfire. When officers arrived at the gas station to arrest Jason, they found he was gone. His supervisor said he'd received a phone call and left in a hurry, claiming a family emergency. A warrant for his arrest was issued immediately. Roads leading out of town were blocked and search parties began to comb the surrounding forests. Jason Collins, now the prime suspect in his mother's murder, had become a fugitive. The preliminary autopsy performed that same night, given the gravity of the case, revealed disturbing details. Sarah Collins had died from poisoning by a sophisticated chemical cocktail, some of which matched the items missing from the school lab. It was meticulously planned, Dr. Montgomery explained to Dawson. The mixture would have caused gradual paralysis, respiratory distress, and finally cardiac arrest. It would have looked almost natural, like respiratory failure, if the body had been found immediately and not buried. The chemicals he stole from the lab, Dawson murmured. The experiments in the basement. Exactly, and the most chilling part, the substances were likely administered over days in small doses, possibly in her food or drink. Dawson remembered Jason's notes on dosages and effects. This hadn't been a crime of passion or impulse. It had been calculated, studied, and executed with cold, scientific precision by a teenager on his own mother. As the town processed the shock, the media began to descend on Oakwood Grove. The story of the teenager who poisoned and buried his mother in the backyard captured the national spotlight. Reporters interviewed neighbors, classmates, and teachers, all asking the same question. How did no one see the signs? The search for Jason continued through the night without success. His photograph was on every news broadcast, and highway checkpoints were extended into neighboring states. At dawn the next day, Dawson, exhausted but unable to rest, returned to the Collins house. He wanted to understand. He needed to comprehend what had driven a seemingly normal young man to commit such a horrific act. As he walked through the empty rooms, now sealed off as a crime scene, one question tormented him. Where was Jason Collins, and what darker secrets might still be hidden in this story of suburban horror? The manhunt for Jason Collins intensified over the following days. His face was on every newscast, in every newspaper, and on every wanted poster along the East Coast. Oakwood Grove, a town that rarely made national headlines, became the epicenter of a case that both fascinated and horrified the country. The boy genius turned murderer. On the third day of the search, a promising lead emerged when a security camera captured Jason buying supplies at a convenience store 60 miles north of Oakwood. The footage showed a gaunt young man with a budding beard and sunken eyes paying in cash and leaving quickly. He's running for Canada, Campbell theorized, coordinating with the state police. If he crosses the border, he'll be much harder to catch. Dawson, however, had his doubts. I don't think he's running, at least not in the way we think. What do you mean? Jason is methodical, a planner. The poisoning of Sarah proves that. He doesn't improvise, Dawson explained. If he wanted to disappear effectively, he wouldn't let himself be caught on a security camera. I think he's deliberately leaving us a trail. Why would he do that? I don't know, Dawson admitted, but there's something more to this story that we haven't uncovered yet. While the chase continued, the full results of Sarah Collins's autopsy were finalized. Dr. Montgomery requested an urgent meeting with Dawson to share findings she described as unsettling. The cause of death was indeed poisoning, Montgomery confirmed, spreading detailed reports across her desk. But there's something else that doesn't fit our initial theory. What did you find? Sarah had extremely high levels of lead and mercury in her system, far beyond what Jason could have introduced in a few days or weeks of gradual poisoning. What does that mean? It means, the medical examiner explained, that Sarah Collins was being poisoned for months, possibly years, before her final death. The chronic toxicity had significantly damaged her internal organs. In fact, her liver was showing signs of imminent failure. Dawson processed this information with a growing sense of unease. Are you saying Sarah was already dying from chronic poisoning before Jason administered the final dose? Exactly, and there's more. Montgomery continued, pointing to another report. We found traces of powerful psychiatric drugs in her system, drugs for which she had no prescription. A new and disturbing dimension of the case was beginning to emerge. Dawson returned to the Collins house with an expanded warrant, this time to specifically search for evidence of long-term poisoning. In the basement, hidden behind a false wall they had overlooked in previous searches, they found a small, homemade laboratory, far more sophisticated than the workbench they had previously discovered. Notebooks detailed experiments conducted over years, with meticulous notes on dosages, effects, and observed symptoms. Most disturbing of all was a journal, written in Jason's neat script, which began 3 years before the murder. Day 1 of the experiment, the first entry read, I have begun administering small doses in her morning coffee. Mom noticed nothing unusual. I will continue to observe and document the effects. Page after page, the journal documented the systematic poisoning of Sarah Collins by her own son, described with the cold detachment of a scientific experiment. Jason noted changes in her behavior, episodes of confusion, and the inexplicable pains Sarah experienced, all while he gradually increased the doses. My God, Dawson muttered as he read. This goes beyond murder. He was experimenting on her, using her as a test subject. Among the entries, they found references to something called Project Asclepius, apparently the code name Jason had given to his macabre experiment. The final entries revealed a disturbing twist. Sarah had started to suspect. He found my notes. Confrontation is inevitable. The experiment must conclude prematurely. Final dose scheduled for tonight. Disposal procedure prepared. This revelation completely reshaped the narrative of the case. This wasn't a troubled teenager who had impulsively killed his mother. It was something far more calculated, far more sinister. A young man who had been methodically poisoning his mother for years as part of some twisted personal experiment. On the 5th day of the search, an anonymous call directed the police to an abandoned cabin in the woods, about 15 miles from Oakwood. Upon arrival, officers found evidence that someone had been living there recently, but there was no trace of Jason. On the cabin's rustic table, however, lay a carefully placed letter addressed to Detective Robert Dawson. Summoned immediately to the scene, Dawson opened the envelope with gloved hands, aware that every element was now crucial evidence. It's from him, he confirmed, recognizing the meticulous handwriting. The letter began with a chilling declaration. By the time you read this, detective, I will have completed the final phase of Project Asclepius. Sarah was not the first, and she will not be the last. The knowledge I have acquired is too valuable to waste. Dawson continued reading aloud, his voice growing more strained with each paragraph. Jason explained how he had begun experimenting with toxins at the age of 14, fascinated by their effects on living organisms. What started with insects and small animals eventually escalated to his own mother. I chose Sarah for convenience and control of the experimental environment, he wrote with disturbing frankness. Oakwood's isolation provided ideal conditions for continuous observation without external interference. The letter ended with a warning that sent a chill down the spine of everyone present. Do not try to find me. By the time you decipher the pattern, I will have already relocated my laboratory. Consider Sarah an unwilling but significant contribution to the advancement of my research. Science requires sacrifice, detective. The hunt for Jason Collins took on an unprecedented urgency. This was no longer just about capturing Sarah Collins's killer. It was about stopping what appeared to be a calculating sociopath with ambitions to continue his macabre experiments. As the FBI officially joined the investigation, classifying Jason as a potential serial killer, Dawson returned to Oakwood Grove with a new perspective. If he wanted to find Jason, he needed to fully understand his origins, his motivations, everything that had shaped this seemingly normal young man into the methodical monster that had emerged. His inquiries led him to Greg Collins, the absentee father who had abandoned the family when Jason was 12. Located in Arizona, Greg revealed unsettling details about Jason's early behavior. He was always different, Greg explained over a video call. Too smart, too observant. We found his collection when he was 10. Insects and small animals dissected, organized, and labeled like specimens. Why did you never mention this before? Dawson pressed. Who would have believed me? Besides, I walked out on my family. I wasn't in a position to point fingers at anyone, Greg replied bitterly. Sarah always defended him. She said it was just scientific curiosity. A week after Jason's disappearance, as the manhunt expanded nationwide, Dawson received another anonymous call. This time, it directed him to an address on the outskirts of Boston. You'll find what you're looking for in the basement, the distorted voice said before hanging up. The building turned out to be an old, abandoned warehouse. In the basement, authorities discovered a sophisticated laboratory clearly set up by Jason. But again, there was no sign of the fugitive. What they did find were detailed notes on 3 more individuals in different states, with meticulous plans for what Jason called field studies. The FBI immediately alerted local authorities, possibly saving lives as the Jason Collins case became one of the country's largest manhunts. Dawson couldn't help but wonder if they would ever fully comprehend the twisted mind they had overlooked for so long in the quiet town of Oakwood Grove. The spring of 2004 brought a new dimension to the Collins case. After 3 months of intensive searching, Jason remained a ghost, appearing briefly on security footage only to vanish without a trace. The FBI had established a detailed profile, a high-functioning sociopath with exceptional intelligence and advanced scientific knowledge, capable of blending seamlessly into his surroundings. Dawson, now working exclusively on the case, had turned a Boston hotel room into his makeshift command center. The walls were covered with photographs, timelines, and maps marked with Jason's confirmed sightings. A baffling pattern was beginning to emerge. He's not running randomly, Dawson explained to Special Agent Tamara Reed, his FBI liaison. His movements are deliberate, almost as if he's following a pre-established plan. Reed studied the map, the points of the sightings connected by lines. It looks like he's tracing some kind of specific route, but to where? The answer came unexpectedly. A chemistry professor from Harvard University contacted the authorities after recognizing Jason at a scientific symposium in Cambridge. By the time agents arrived, Jason was gone again. But he had left something behind. He had registered for the event under the name Dr. Asclepius Johnson and had submitted a short research paper on innovative applications of neurotoxic compounds in experimental medical treatments. It's a game to him, Reed concluded after reviewing the paper, which was scientifically sound but ethically disturbing. He's showing off, proving his intelligence while he taunts us. Not only that, Dawson added, he's seeking validation. He wants his work to be recognized, even if it's under a pseudonym. This new information led to an expansion of the search into academic and scientific circles. Universities, pharmaceutical labs, and medical conferences were all alerted to the possibility of Jason attempting to infiltrate their environments. Meanwhile, back in Oakwood Grove, the Collins house was finally sent by the state. The new owners, a young couple from Portland, unaware of the property's macabre history, began extensive renovations. During the demolition of the basement, workers discovered something unsettling behind another false wall. A small hidden space containing carefully labeled jars. Dawson returned to Oakwood immediately upon being notified. The jars, analyzed by the FBI lab, contained human tissue samples preserved in formaldehyde. They were labeled with names no one initially recognized, until Dawson made the connection. They were the names of pets that had gone missing from Oakwood Grove years ago. "He started with animals," Dawson told Reed. "Dogs and cats from the neighborhood. He practiced on them before moving on to his mother." One jar, however, stood out from the rest. Labeled simply GC Initial Test, it contained what appeared to be human hair. "GC," Dawson murmured. "Greg Collins." An urgent call to Arizona confirmed a horrifying suspicion. Greg Collins had been hospitalized several times during the last few years of his marriage with symptoms that doctors had attributed to stress or a possible autoimmune disease. Symptoms that, in retrospect, perfectly matched heavy metal poisoning. Jason didn't start with Sarah, Dawson concluded, a wave of horror washing over him. He started with his father. That's probably why Greg left the family. He was getting sick and he didn't know why. This revelation added a new potential victim to Jason's history and confirmed that his homicidal tendencies had begun far earlier than they had initially assumed. In May, a crucial breakthrough occurred when a pharmacist in Philadelphia reported a young man attempting to purchase controlled chemical precursors using a fake ID. The description matched Jason, but again he had vanished before authorities arrived. This time, however, he left something significant behind. On the order form, he had jotted down an email address. FBI technicians traced the account to a cyber cafe in Baltimore, where security footage confirmed Jason had been a regular visitor for the past several weeks. By monitoring the email account, investigators discovered that Jason had been communicating with someone under the pseudonym Mentor. The exchanges, highly technical, discussed advances in toxicological research and experimental procedures. "He's found a mentor," Reed explained, "someone who shares his twisted interests." After weeks of meticulous digital forensics, the FBI identified the mentor as Dr. Victor Merrick, a once respected biochemist who had been ostracized from the scientific community after proposing experiments on non-consenting human subjects. Merrick had vanished from public life a decade ago, presumably to continue his controversial work in the shadows. The connection between Jason and Merrick presented a nightmare scenario: a brilliant young sociopath under the tutelage of an unscrupulous scientist with advanced resources and knowledge. In June, Baltimore police discovered an abandoned apartment where Jason had apparently been living. Among his belongings, they found something disturbing. Surveillance photos of 3 different individuals, all medical professionals in the Baltimore area, with detailed notes on their daily routines. "He's selecting new subjects," Dawson concluded. "People with access to medical facilities and knowledge that could be useful to him." A joint FBI and local police operation established surveillance on the 3 potential targets. The wait was brief. 2 days later, Jason was spotted following Dr. Eleanor Chen, a neuropharmacologist at Johns Hopkins Hospital, to her home. The arrest had to be perfect. Tactical teams surrounded Chen's residence while Jason watched from a parked vehicle half a block away. As agents moved in to intercept him, Jason reacted with surprising speed, throwing something into his vehicle before attempting to flee on foot. "Bomb!" one of the agents shouted, triggering an immediate retreat just moments before a small but powerful explosion destroyed the vehicle. In the ensuing confusion, Jason disappeared once more into the streets of Baltimore. The blast, though contained, demonstrated another disturbing level of preparation. Jason wasn't just a talented chemist, he had also acquired knowledge of explosives. As the manhunt intensified, Dawson received a call directly on his personal cell phone, a number that was not publicly available. "Impressive display, Detective," said the voice Dawson immediately recognized as Jason Collins. "But unnecessary. I wasn't going to harm Dr. Chen, I just wanted to talk to her." "Jason, this has to end," Dawson replied, frantically signaling to Reed to initiate a trace on the call. "You know you can't keep running forever." "I'm not running, Detective, I'm advancing. My work is too important to be interrupted by people who can't comprehend its scope." "Your work? You mean poisoning people? Experimenting on them without their consent? That's not science, Jason, it's monstrous." A soft laugh echoed down the line. "True breakthroughs have always been labeled monstrous by limited minds. History will judge my work differently." "How will history judge you for killing your own mother?" Dawson pressed, trying to keep him on the line as the trace continued. A brief silence. "Sarah was a special case, a necessary sacrifice. But I didn't call to discuss the past, Detective." "Then why did you call?" "To warn you. The next phase is beginning, and it would be wise for you to stay away. Dr. Merrick and I are on the verge of achieving something extraordinary. Something that will change our understanding of human neurobiochemistry." "Jason, you can still make this right. Turn yourself in. Get help." Another laugh. "Help? I don't need help, Detective. I need to be left alone to work. This will be our last conversation. Goodbye." The call ended abruptly. The trace had located the signal at a cell tower near the port of Baltimore. But by the time agents arrived, there was no sign of Jason. What followed was a race against time. If Jason and Dr. Merrick were initiating some kind of next phase, potentially involving multiple victims, the situation had escalated from a manhunt to a public safety crisis. July 2004 marked a turning point in the search for Jason Collins. The threat of a next phase had elevated the case to a national priority, with unprecedented resources dedicated to locating both Jason and the elusive Dr. Victor Merrick. The updated psychological profile of Jason was alarming. Not only was he a meticulous sociopath, but his association with Merrick suggested a potential escalation to larger-scale experiments. Dawson, now working out of FBI headquarters in Quantico, was leading a specialized task force focused exclusively on predicting Jason's movements. His obsession with the case had taken its toll. Sleepless nights and an irregular diet had left the detective gaunt, a perpetual tremor in his hands from too much caffeine. "We need to think like him," Dawson insisted during a strategy meeting. "Jason doesn't act impulsively. Every move has a calculated purpose." Agent Reed pointed to a digital map projecting all of Jason's confirmed sightings. "We've analyzed the movement pattern with predictive algorithms. There's a geographical consistency. He always stays on the East Coast, primarily in urban areas with nearby medical or scientific research institutions." A new lead emerged when a graduate biochemistry student at Johns Hopkins University reported that his server account had been accessed by an unauthorized user. The logs showed that several research papers on experimental neurotoxins and their potential therapeutic applications had been downloaded. The IP address originates from an apartment in Alexandria, Virginia, the FBI's technical specialist reported, occupied by a Dr. Malcolm Werner, a visiting professor of pharmacology. A quick check revealed that no legitimate Dr. Malcolm Werner existed in academic circles. Security photos from the building confirmed what they suspected. Werner was, in fact, Victor Merrick, Jason's mentor. The tactical team raided the apartment that night only to find it recently abandoned. Merrick had fled, but in his haste he had left behind something invaluable, a detailed journal of his interactions with Jason Collins and, more importantly, partial plans for what they called Project Prometheus. "It's worse than we imagined," Reed explained after analysts reviewed the journal. "They aren't just experimenting on isolated individuals. They're developing something for mass administration." The journal detailed how Jason and Merrick had been perfecting a unique neurotoxic compound that, in precise doses, could alter brain function without causing obvious permanent damage. Most alarmingly, they were designing a method to disperse it through the ventilation systems of public spaces. "This isn't about killing," Dawson murmured as he read the notes. "It's about control. They want to prove they can manipulate human behavior on a grand scale." Among the documents were partial blueprints of a ventilation system that analysts identified as belonging to the Baltimore Convention Center, where a major international medical conference was scheduled to be held in 2 weeks. "They have their target," Dawson declared, "a hall filled with doctors and scientists, the perfect audience for their twisted demonstration." Armed with this critical intelligence, an interagency task force was established to secure the convention center. They instituted intensive surveillance on all entrances, ventilation systems, and surrounding areas. The conference would proceed as planned, but with a reinforced security detail. Moving like ghosts among the oblivious crowd, their presence a secret to prevent widespread alarm. While security preparations were underway, a package with no return address arrived for Dawson at his hotel. Inside was a small vial of clear liquid and a note, written in Jason's unmistakable hand. "A courtesy sample, detective, completely harmless at this concentration. When you see the full effects, you will understand the magnitude of our achievement. Science advances through demonstration, not theory." The FBI lab urgently analyzed the contents, confirming it was a diluted version of the compound described in Merrick's notes. Even at this reduced strength, preliminary tests on lab mice showed significant alterations in behavioral patterns, specifically an increased susceptibility to suggestion. "It's a perverse masterpiece," the FBI's lead chemist admitted begrudgingly. "The compound targets the very receptors in the brain responsible for decision-making and critical thought, leaving motor functions and vital signs untouched." In the week before the conference, surveillance was intensified to unprecedented levels. Every maintenance technician, every delivery, every piece of equipment installed in the convention center was checked and rechecked. Undercover agents moved among the staff, disguised as janitors, technicians, and conference aides. 3 days before the event, Dawson's personal phone rang. "An impressive deployment of resources, detective." Jason's voice was calm, almost admiring, "but predictable." "We know what you're planning, Jason," Dawson replied as technicians frantically worked to trace the call. "The convention center is locked down." A soft laugh came through the line. "Did you really think I would reveal my true intentions in documents that could be so easily discovered? Dr. Merrick may be brilliant, but he is careless. Those plans were a contingency, not our primary objective." A chill traced its way down Dawson's spine. "What is your real objective, Jason?" "That would spoil the surprise, but I will give you a hint. While you focus all your resources on Baltimore, you should be asking yourself what's happening in Boston." The call ended abruptly. The trace located the signal in an abandoned industrial park on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., but Dawson knew Jason would be long gone. "It's a misdirection," Dawson exclaimed to Reed. "Baltimore was never the real target. We need teams in Boston, now." A rapid analysis identified three major events scheduled in Boston that week: a technology conference, a political summit, and the inauguration of a new neurological research wing at Massachusetts General Hospital. The hospital, Dawson declared with certainty. It's his style. A controlled environment, access to medical equipment, and an audience of professionals who would appreciate the scientific significance of his demonstration. While resources were rerouted to Boston, maintaining a sufficient security footprint in Baltimore as a precaution, Dawson and a specialized team took the first flight to Massachusetts. The inauguration of the neurological wing, attended by prominent figures from the international medical community, was scheduled for the following morning. Arriving in Boston, Dawson felt the crushing weight of the clock. If they were right, they had less than 12 hours to find Jason and Merrick before they could execute their plan. The team established a command center within the hospital, working with internal security to review every aspect of the new building. Last-minute background checks revealed something alarming. One of the new technicians hired for the HVAC system, a man named Thomas Green, had submitted credentials that, while perfect on a superficial check, corresponded to no real person. "It's Merrick," Reed confirmed, comparing the ID photo with known images. "He's been on the inside for 3 weeks." With this confirmation, a silent operation began to locate Green without alerting any potential accomplices. Security footage showed he had accessed the central ventilation system that very morning, installing what appeared to be an unauthorized device. "We need to evacuate discreetly," the tactical operations chief insisted. "We can't risk civilian lives. If we evacuate, we tip our hand," Dawson countered. "Jason is watching. If he sees we're onto him, he'll implement a fallback plan, or worse, disappear to try this again somewhere else some other time." The decision was a calculated risk. They would proceed with the inauguration as planned, but with hidden chemical detectors and rapid response teams positioned strategically throughout the building. Every guest would be discreetly screened, and the ventilation system would be under constant watch. The morning of the inauguration dawned bright and clear in Boston. As the guests began to arrive, Dawson watched from an improvised control room, scrutinizing every face on the security monitors, searching the crowd for Jason. "He has to be here," he muttered. "He wouldn't miss his big moment." As the event got underway, the tension among the security team was palpable. The inaugural address was about to begin when one of the surveillance techs noticed movement in a ventilation duct near the main hall. "We have activity in the north sector," he reported. "Someone is accessing the device Merrick installed." Dawson watched the monitor, where a barely visible figure was manipulating something inside the duct. "This is our chance. Tactical team, proceed with extreme caution. I want that subject alive." As the team mobilized, moving silently through the corridors, Dawson couldn't shake the feeling that they were either about to finally capture Jason Collins, or that the young man who had murdered his own mother and eluded them for months was, once again, one step ahead. The tactical team moved with military precision, communicating with silent hand signals. Dawson, wearing a ballistic vest and an earpiece, advanced alongside them. After months of hunting Jason, this felt as personal as it was professional. "Subject is still in the ventilation duct, Section 5B, the surveillance tech reported. "Minimal movement. Looks like he's finalizing some kind of installation." As they closed in, Dawson could feel the adrenaline coursing through him. Thermal scans confirmed a single heat signature in the duct. This was it. The tactical leader gave the signal. In one coordinated motion, 2 agents pried open the access hatch while 2 others leveled their weapons at the opening. "FBI, don't move!" the team leader commanded. The figure inside the duct froze for a moment before scrambling backward. The agents acted swiftly, pulling the suspect out with professional efficiency and securing him on the floor. It wasn't Jason Collins. It wasn't even Victor Merrick. "Who the hell is this?" Dawson murmured, looking down at the man, a middle-aged, terrified-looking maintenance worker. "John Kimball," the man stammered. "I'm an HVAC tech. I was sent to check on an alert in this sector." A quick check confirmed his identity. He was a legitimate hospital employee. As they questioned him, it became clear he had been manipulated, sent a call, supposedly from the maintenance department, to check on a potential leak in that specific duct. "Someone used him as a diversion," Reed concluded with frustration. "They wanted our eyes focused here." The device Kimball had found in the duct was real but harmless. A simple airflow meter modified to send false alerts to the central system. "We're wasting time," Dawson urged. "If this is the distraction, where is the main event?" The answer came seconds later as alarms began to shriek from the chemical detection system installed in the hospital's main wing. "We have positive readings in the main conference hall," a technician yelled. "Something is being dispersed through the central ventilation system." In the conference hall, where over 200 doctors, researchers, and donors had gathered, the vents had begun to emit a nearly imperceptible aerosol. The detectors had caught it, but it was already in the air. "Biochemical containment protocol now," Reed ordered. "Seal all exits and activate the emergency filtration systems." The controlled chaos that followed was a testament to the FBI's rigorous training. As medical teams administered preventative countermeasures to everyone present, the filtration systems worked to scrub the compound from the air. Dawson, however, wasn't in the conference hall. An instinct born from months of tracking Jason told him to look elsewhere. "If I were Jason, I'd want to watch my masterpiece," he thought to himself, scanning the security cameras. He'd be close, but not too close. His attention locked onto a solitary figure in the hospital cafeteria, calmly sipping a coffee while watching the news on a wall-mounted television. The young man wore a doctor's white coat and an ID badge, but something in his posture set off Dawson's internal alarms. "I have a potential suspect in the first-floor cafeteria," he said into his radio. "I'm moving to verify." "Wait for backup, Detective," Reed responded. "We don't know if he's armed." But Dawson was already moving. After everything, he couldn't risk Jason slipping away again. The cafeteria was nearly empty due to the emergency. Dawson walked in casually, as if looking for a coffee, while he sized up the suspect. The young man had changed his appearance, dyed hair, glasses, even his posture seemed different. But Dawson would recognize those eyes anywhere. Calculating, observant, and devoid of any real emotion. Jason Collins looked up as Dawson approached his table. For a moment, their eyes met in mutual recognition. "Detective Dawson," he greeted with surprising calm. "We finally meet in person." "It's over, Jason," Dawson said, discreetly noting that backup was beginning to position itself at the entrances. "There's no way out this time." Jason smiled faintly. "There are always ways out, Detective. The question is whether they're worth taking." "Why not resist?" Dawson asked, genuinely curious. "You've eluded us for months. Why give up now?" "Who said anything about giving up?" Jason took another sip of his coffee. "Phase 1 of Project Prometheus is already complete. What's happening upstairs is merely a preliminary demonstration." A chill ran down Dawson's spine. "What have you done, Jason?" "I've made history," he replied with unnerving serenity. "The compound in the conference hall is harmless, a diluted version designed to provoke mild, temporary symptoms. Enough to prove its efficacy, but not enough to cause permanent damage. And Dr. Merrick? A brilliant but expendable collaborator. He has served his purpose." As they spoke, agents had closed in. On Dawson's signal, they moved to arrest Jason, who, surprisingly, offered no resistance. "This all seems too easy," Dawson commented as they cuffed him. "Months on the run and now you just let us take you? What's your real game?" Jason tilted his head slightly. "Detective, you're smarter than that. Do you really believe Project Prometheus is limited to a single event in a single hospital?" Before Dawson could respond, his phone rang. It was Reed. "We have a problem," he said, his voice tense. "Reports are coming in of similar incidents at hospitals in Chicago, San Francisco, and Atlanta. Same methodology, same compound." Dawson's face went pale as he stared at Jason, who wore an expression of quiet satisfaction. "It was never just about Boston," Jason confirmed, reading Dawson's expression. "Or Baltimore. Those were simply nodes in a much larger network. Dr. Merrick has like-minded colleagues all across the country." "What the hell is Project Prometheus?" Dawson demanded as agents began to lead Jason away. "An evolution," he replied enigmatically. "The Greeks said Prometheus stole fire from the gods to give to mankind. We are doing something similar, redefining the very limits of human neurological control." During transport to the FBI's maximum security facility, Jason maintained a disturbing composure, answering questions with half-truths and cryptic statements that hinted at a plan far grander than anything the authorities had yet uncovered. The incidents at the other hospitals were quickly contained thanks to the protocols established after the Boston alert. The exposed victims all showed mild but significant symptoms: heightened suggestibility, diminished critical thinking, and an eerie willingness to follow instructions without question. "It's like a biochemical Trojan horse," one of the FBI scientists explained. "The compound causes no obvious harm, but it subtly alters brain chemistry, creating a window of vulnerability. During that period, the victims are exceptionally susceptible to psychological programming." The implications were terrifying. Jason and his collaborators had effectively developed a chemical mind control tool, and they had tested it on hundreds of elite medical professionals. During his first formal interrogation, Jason remained unnervingly calm. When Dawson asked about his motives, he answered with disturbing clarity. "Humanity is stagnant, detective. We advance technologically, but we are still bound by our primitive brains, by our irrational fears, by our antiquated notions of morality. Project Prometheus isn't about control, it's about liberation. It's about allowing humanity to overcome its inherent neurological limitations." "You poisoned and murdered your own mother," Dawson countered harshly. "Was that for the good of humanity, too?" For the first time, something like emotion flickered across Jason's face. "Sarah was a miscalculation. My first significant subject. I didn't adequately anticipate how the compound would interact with her specific brain chemistry. Her death provided invaluable data that allowed us to significantly refine the formula." The coldness with which Jason spoke of his own mother as a test subject sent a chill through the room. Even the seasoned FBI agents were disturbed by his complete lack of remorse or emotional connection. Meanwhile, specialized teams worked frantically to identify and capture Jason's collaborators across the country. Victor Merrick was still at large, as were several other scientists identified as part of what the media was beginning to call the Prometheus Network. That night, alone in his hotel room, Dawson contemplated the case's ramifications. They had captured Jason Collins, but the sense of victory was hollow. Something about Jason's confidence, his seeming willingness to be caught, suggested the real threat was only just beginning to reveal itself. His phone rang at midnight. He didn't recognize the number. "Detective Dawson," he answered cautiously. "Robert." The woman's voice on the other end was professional but urgent. "This is Dr. Eleanor Chen from Johns Hopkins. We met briefly during the Baltimore investigation." "Dr. Chen, how did you get this number?" That doesn't matter right now. What matters is that you need to run a blood panel on Jason Collins immediately. Why? What am I looking for? The compound itself, Chen replied. I believe Jason has been experimenting on himself for years. He's not just the creator of Project Prometheus, he's its first successful subject. The blood work confirmed their theory. Jason Collins had significant levels of the Prometheus compound in his system, administered over a period that experts estimated to be at least 3 years. He's been self-experimenting since before he killed his mother, Dawson explained during an emergency meeting with the investigation team. This isn't just some mad scientist creating a mind control drug. It's someone who has permanently altered his own brain chemistry. What does that mean for our case? Reed asked, scanning the new medical reports. It means we're not dealing with a common sociopath, replied Dr. Chen, who had been officially brought on as a consultant. We're dealing with someone who has systematically rewired his own emotional responses and cognitive processes. Jason literally redesigned his own mind. The subsequent interrogations of Jason took on a new dimension. With Dr. Chen observing, Dawson tried a different strategy, understanding, not accusing. You started with yourself, Dawson began, sliding the lab results across the table. Before Sarah, before anyone else, you became your own subject zero. A faint smile touched Jason's lips like a professor pleased with a clever student. Self-transformation is the first principle of Project Prometheus, Detective. How could I ask the world to evolve if I wasn't willing to take the first step myself? And when did you start? At 15, very primitive versions of the compound, of course. The side effects were challenging, but each iteration improved the formula. It's why you poisoned your father. Another early experiment. Jason's expression darkened for a moment. Greg wasn't a scientific experiment. He was the removal of an obstacle. He interfered with my work. He questioned my interests. He didn't understand what I was trying to achieve. And Sarah? Was she an obstacle too? Sarah was complicated, Jason replied, choosing his words carefully. At first, she was simply a convenient subject for long-term observation. Then she started noticing changes in my behavior. She found my journal, my notes. She became a risk to the project. The clinical coldness with which Jason discussed his mother's murder was made more disturbing by the complete absence of malice. He spoke not with hatred or anger, but with the dispassionate objectivity of a scientist discussing experimental variables. Meanwhile, the nationwide hunt for Victor Merrick and the other identified collaborators continued. Medical and research facilities implemented heightened security protocols, and government agencies worked to track every gram of the chemical precursors used in the Prometheus compound. 3 weeks after Jason's capture, a significant breakthrough occurred. A raid on a clandestine lab in the Seattle suburbs led not only to the capture of 2 key collaborators, but also to the discovery of detailed documents outlining the entire structure of the Prometheus network. It's bigger than we imagined, Reed Addison reported. 17 scientists in total, operating in semi-independent cells across 8 different cities, all connected through Merrick, who in turn reported to Jason. Any sign of Merrick? Not yet, but we're closing in. The documents suggest he has a primary lab somewhere in the Adirondack Mountains. As the larger investigation unfolded, Dawson continued his sessions with Jason, trying to decipher the true scope of Project Prometheus. Each conversation revealed another layer of a disturbingly grandiose vision. It's not about mind control, Jason explained during their 5th session. That's a crude simplification. The Prometheus compound allows for targeted neurological optimization. Think of it as debugging the code for the human brain. Debugging? What exactly are you debugging? Evolutionary inefficiencies, counterproductive emotional responses, inherent cognitive biases. Jason leaned forward, his eyes glinting with an unusual intensity. Most of humanity's problems stem from outdated brain architecture that evolved for environments that no longer exist. We're using 21st century tools with Pleistocene-era brains. Dawson studied him carefully. Is that why you don't feel empathy anymore? You debugged it as an inefficiency? I didn't eliminate empathy, detective. I reconceptualized it. Conventional empathy is short-sighted, focused on immediate individuals at the expense of long-term collective well-being. My version extends to humanity as a species, to its future trajectory. It was this kind of twisted logic that made conversations with Jason so unsettling. On the surface, his arguments sounded almost reasonable, even visionary, until you considered the full implications and the means he was willing to employ. In September, nearly 4 months after Jason's capture, the largest coordinated operation in recent FBI history culminated in simultaneous raids on 12 different locations. 15 of the 17 identified collaborators were captured, along with significant quantities of the Prometheus compound and its precursors. Victor Merrick, however, remained a ghost. His lab in the Adirondacks had been abandoned weeks earlier, with evidence that he had methodically destroyed his most critical research before vanishing. The night after the raids, Dawson visited Jason in his specially equipped cell. The young man seemed peculiarly content for someone whose network had just been dismantled. "Congratulations, detective," he greeted cordially. "An impressive operation." "It's over, Jason. We've captured nearly all your collaborators. We've confiscated your compounds. Merrick is the only one left, and it's just a matter of time." Jason smiled enigmatically. "You really think this is about specific individuals or physical compounds? Project Prometheus was never just a network or a chemical formula. It's an idea, detective. And ideas once released cannot be dismantled. They can't be contained." "What do you mean?" "The individuals you captured today are just the first generation. The knowledge is already out there, the principles established. Others will continue the work, refining it, expanding upon it. No one is going to continue experiments that violate every ethical principle of medical research." Jason's laugh was soot but unsettling. "Ethics are relative, detective. They change with time. They evolve with understanding. What seems transgressive today may be considered visionary tomorrow. History is filled with examples." As Dawson left the maximum security facility that night, Jason's words haunted him. What if he was right? What if Project Prometheus truly was an idea that, once unleashed upon the world, could never be contained? A month later, the case officially drew to a close. Jason Collins was declared mentally incompetent to stand trial after exhaustive psychiatric evaluations revealed significant brain alterations caused by his long-term self-experimentation. He was committed indefinitely to a maximum security psychiatric facility specializing in exceptional criminal cases. The captured collaborators faced various charges, from conspiracy to illegal human experimentation. The Prometheus Network, as an operational organization, had been effectively dismantled. Officially, the case was considered closed, a success for law enforcement. Dawson even received a commendation for his exceptional work. In his Portland apartment, however, Dawson's walls remained covered with documents from the case. His obsession had shifted from capturing Jason to fully understanding the ramifications of Project Prometheus. Something about Jason's final words still troubled him. On a cold November night, while reviewing Jason's confiscated journals for the 100th time, Dawson received an anonymous package. Inside was a single hard drive and a handwritten note. "By the time you read this, I will be permanently gone. But I wanted you, of all people, to understand the whole truth." Jason Collins was not the architect of Project Prometheus. He was merely its first public success. Look for the older patterns, detective. This began long before Sarah Collins. VM. The hard drive contained decades of research that predated Jason Collins, documenting similar experiments reaching back to the 1970s. Names of respected scientists, prestigious institutions, even classified government programs appeared in the files, suggesting a conspiracy deeper and older than anyone had ever imagined. As Dawson stared at this new, disturbing information, one final question remained. If Jason Collins wasn't the architect but merely a successful product of something much larger, then who or what was truly behind Project Prometheus and how much of their work was still continuing in the shadows? In his padded cell, under constant surveillance, Jason Collins would smile as he stared at the ceiling. The doctors attributed his strange serenity to his altered mental state. None of them could know he was listening to frequencies no one else could hear, communicating through methods no security protocol could ever detect. Project Prometheus was continuing, just as it was always meant to. And somewhere out there, Victor Merrick, and others whose names had never been discovered, carried on their work, patient and methodical, preparing for the next phase of what they considered humanity's directed evolution. Meanwhile, in Oakwood Grove, Maine, the new owner of the old Collins house discovered something strange while digging to install a swimming pool. It was a small, deeply buried glass vial with a label that simply read, Phase 0, 1999. The owner, thinking nothing of it, tossed it in the trash, unaware he had just discarded the very first iteration of a compound that had nearly changed the course of human history. The story of Sarah Collins, the single mother who vanished in 2002, had become part of Oakwood Grove's dark folklore. Few remembered the specific details now, how an old security camera recording had revealed the macabre truth buried, quite literally, in her own backyard. But for Robert Dawson, the case would never truly be over. The disappearance of Sarah Collins had only been the beginning of a far deeper mystery, one that would continue to haunt him for the rest of his days.